Thank you for coming and have a great day.
This is incredible. Thank you all for coming. Um, like Kathy said, I have the privilege of serving all of you as the chairperson for our local advisory council. Um, and this event uh, has been in the making for a year. A lot of hard work to make things all come together. And we are super happy that Annie over here chose to lead this project. So let's give Annie a round of applause. We have some great speakers today. Um, and to lead us off is Dr. Mulcaire Jones, and he is going to share with us the importance of ACEs. And all of this is going to tie into the circle of life, how mental health starts at the beginning and goes all the way through the end. So let's welcome Dr. Mulcaire Jones.
There's no stairs on that side.
I was going to hop up there.
I mean, if you want to vault it, feel free.
Thank you very much. Kathy and Bill, it really is an honor to be here. I wasn't sure if I was in Missoula, where I'm living, or Butte, when I found out that Kathy can call up the mayor and get rid of our parking tickets. I thought, I'm in Butte. I'm going to talk with JP. I have a couple other criminal offenses that I'm going to see if he can get rid of. So thank you for being here. Really is an honor to speak with you. I practiced family medicine and obstetrics for about 30 years in Butte. And I have to say, I had the easy job. In obstetrics, I had to, catch the baby and hopefully get the placenta out. While the social workers, the counselors, everybody else had to deal with the real deep issues, the mental illness, the domestic violence, homelessness, etc. So that was real work. And in my family medicine practice, mainly I can hand out medications and that. But again, the deep work, the counseling, addressing all the social determinants and so forth that you all did was really, really critical. So I'd like to thank you for all you've done and all you do. You have a tough job and you do a great work in it. So as Bill said, I'm going to talk about ACEs. And I know many of you are already familiar with them, so I'm not going to be telling you anything new, but hopefully maybe reinforce what you're doing and bring up a few different angles. I really love that title, that the circles of life. And unfortunately, for many in our community and in our state and throughout the country, that circle of life is too small, too troubled, too lonely. And we have to widen it to welcome persons back into a circle of belonging. That's really what this is all about. So I'm going to begin in a strange and faraway place.
Corner down here, George.
Oh, that's how it works.
Try the
Let's try
bottom,
again.
maybe.
Maybe.
First run through.
Oh, sure isn't. Well, thank you very much. It was great. My morning started off kind of like this. I was at the Northwest Energy Building. I thought that's where the conference was at.
No, it worked yesterday, but point at me. I'll change your slides if that works.
We got it.
All right.
Okay. So as I said, I'm going to start in kind of a strange place in the country of Swaziland in the southern region of Africa, which even to this day has the highest HIV prevalence in Africa. So I'm there in 2003 at the peak of the HIV epidemic. And at that time, there's no treatment. There's no antiretrovirals. There's very little testing, counseling. And if you went into a hospital or into a home where there was an AIDS patient, what you saw was unbelievable. These people were dying of severe opportunistic infections, disseminated tuberculosis, fungal meningitis. There was something that was called HIV wasting syndrome, where people would just waste away, just became skeletal. It's almost like you were seeing a concentration camp, and nothing could be done. And then those hospitals were so much different because it wasn't like a hospital here that's primarily older people. It was young people. It was children, young people dying. And by their side was the grandparents. So it was really awful. And if we looked at that from a population perspective, this is what we saw.
Wonderful.
I'll just keep talking. So what we had was, at that time, every day there was 9,000 Africans dying of HIV. But at the same time, okay, here we go, great. Do you have a pointer by chance?
I do not.
Okay. So at the same time, there was 9,000 patients dying every day. There was 14,000 new HIV infections. So what that was doing was completely overwhelming the system. So if you look at that first slide there, you see there's HIV negative at the bottom of the pyramid. There's a red line, and that's when someone would get HIV and become HIV positive. And what does the arrow do? It just goes straight up. Once you got HIV at that time, you progressed through a stage where you were infected, but you weren't showing symptoms, to getting AIDS-related illnesses, and to dying. There's nothing you could do to stop that. Once you were HIV positive at that time, you were going to die. And what was happening, if you look at the second slide, is that was completely overwhelming the system. There's no way that an African country could take care of all those people who were sick and dying. And you could have all the testing resources, everything else, it was still going to overwhelm your system. And so that's exactly what was happening. So what had to happen to stop the HIV epidemic is, if you go back to the first slide, you had to stop people from getting new HIV infections. Otherwise, what's going to order the system? So once they crossed that blood red line, we called it, there was trouble. We had to stop new HIV infections. Next slide. So here's another pyramid. And this is where I think there's a parallel in our own communities with mental illness. How many here feel overwhelmed by the volume of work you have to do in caring for people with mental illness? Raise your hand. Okay. A majority. How many feel overwhelmed trying to address some of the social determinants, the poverty, the broken families, the substance use? Anybody here feel overwhelmed? There you go. So it's kind of like the same thing that was happening with HIV. We're being overwhelmed. And if we look at what the line is, what is it that we've kind of stopped so it doesn't completely overwhelm our system? It comes down to ACEs, okay? Adverse childhood experiences. So if you look at this, I don't know if you can all see it. Again, once someone has adverse childhood experiences, again, there's a score. You guys know about that. The higher the score, the more likely. Then this is what unfolds. So until we start preventing adverse childhood experiences, it's going to overwhelm the system. Are we together? Does that make sense? No. Okay. Next. Okay. So this is a poet. His name is Richard Hugo, and he was at the University of Montana. And somewhere around 1967, he was probably had a few drinks, and he was in Butte, and he wrote this to a poet colleague of his. I'm in a town where children get hurt early, degraded by drab homes, beaten by drunken parents, by other children. The mines here are not diamond. Nothing is. What endures is sadness and long memories of labor wars. My heart goes out through the stinking air into the shacks of Walkerville, to the wife who has turned forever to the wall, the husband sobbing at the kitchen table, and the unwashed children taking it all in. I know the cruelty of poverty, the embittering ways love is denied, the mean near sanity of being deprived. I am in a town where children get hurt early. So that was in 1967. That was in Butte. I grew up in East Helena, a smelter town. Know some of you from Anaconda. Wasn't a whole lot different there. And the term ACEs hadn't been invented, but Richard Hugo was poetically writing about ACEs, children getting hurt early, and how that haunts them the rest of their life. So there's a lot of metaphors about ACEs. And the one that really kind of grabs me and really kind of saddens me is someone described the long shadows of ACEs, how ACEs cast a shadow over your future. And we can look at some statistics in that shadow and that too. This is just something from the past year. If you look at a couple of those numbers, nearly 50 million adults experienced a mental illness in 2019. So that's about 1 out of 5. Almost 25% of women, of people with mental illness, have never been seen. On and on and on. Next. Now, this is something which really struck me as well. Again, looking at ACEs. Can everybody see, it says population attributable risk. Can you see that back there? So what that says is looking at is what percent of a given condition is secondary to ACEs. And in this graph here, you see, for example, suicide attempts. 67% of that is attributed to someone's ACEs. If you look at alcoholism, 65%. On and on and on. So that gives you an idea of the impact of ACEs on mental health. Next. We all dealing with the substance use epidemic. Fentanyl is the latest here too. This was a study that was actually done in Montana. So it reflects our number. And it looked at opioid misuse related to number of ACEs. What we see is if you kind of follow it, if someone had 1 to 2 ACEs, they had 3.5 times the risk of developing an opiate use disorder. If they had 3 or more ACEs, they had 7 times the risk. So what is the genesis of opiate use disorder? A lot of times it's ACEs. This is one of the gurus of ACEs and substance use. His name is Dr. Daniel Sumrock. I really like his beard; it's much better than mine. But this is what he said. He says, it's not the drugs, it's the adverse childhood experiences. And he bases that on his unbelievable professional experience in caring with people with substance use disorders. So here's a final statistic, couple statistics. So if we look at out of 100 people, take for example heart disease, close to the end there. If you have no ACEs, your chance of getting heart disease is 1 in 14. If you have 4 to 10 ACEs, it's 1 in 6. Suicide attempts, the last one. No ACEs, 1 in 96. 4 to 10 ACEs, 1 in 5. Again, ACEs, ACEs, ACEs. Next. Finally, when we look at chronic disease, so this isn't just about mental health. ACEs are associated with all kinds of physical health, and they estimate that 15% of deaths are total mortality are associated with ACEs. Okay, ACEs are a big deal. Next. So remember what I said about the long shadow of ACEs? So the long shadow goes into our future as we've explored, but the shadow also goes into our past. It goes back into our childhood, to when we were in the womb, and it even goes back to our ancestors. So one example of that is our native communities, which are very vulnerable to ACEs and substance use, mental illness. And there is this profound historical trauma that has taken place in our native communities. So, for example, this is just a picture of Wounded Knee. Is anybody heard of Wounded Knee? So, yeah, it was the site of a massacre, I think, in 1890. We have something that's worse than Wounded Knee on the Blackfeet, the Pig and Blackfeet. It's called the Marias Massacre. 217, mainly women and children, were massacred by a cavalry regiment. And to this day, that haunts the Blackfeet. As we'll talk about, that doesn't haunt them in kind of an existential way. It gets embodied. It becomes part of their genetics. So the shadows go back to what we call the first 1,000 days of life. Has anybody here heard of the first 1,000 days? Yay, thank you. So the first 1,000 days is, when I first learned about it, was stunning, because I thought, here I've been to medical school, I've been in practice, I'm supposed to be a smart doctor, and I don't know what the 1,000 days of life is. So what it is the most critical time of human development. And it comes from adding 3 numbers, 270, which is the average time of human gestation from conception to birth, 365, which is the first year of life from birth to age 1, and year 1 to year 2. So what is happening during this time? The brain is going from a simple neural tube to the most complex organ in biological existence. Billions and billions of neurons are being laid down and networked together. At the age of 2, a baby's brain is about 80% of its adult size. Not only is the brain developing, but everything is getting hooked up. The organ systems, the hormonal system, the immunological system is all connecting together. So what happens during that first 1,000 days of life can bless or haunt a child for the duration. So you can imagine that ACEs that occur in that time frame have a lasting impact. So, as I said, most critical time of human development, and the most important time that we prevent ACEs. So, the ACE literature talks about maternal and perinatal adversity. So, for example, stress in pregnancy can, from domestic violence or even a stressful relationship, can increase the level of cortisol, which affects the baby's adrenal glands and pituitary glands, can affect baby's growth. So we look at that. This is from Time magazine back in the early 90s. And what it says, the cover is how the first 9 months shape the rest of your life. So what happens in the womb and the home becomes biologically embedded. So these ACEs, this kind of stress and adversity can actually be embedded into our DNA, into our epigenetics. I'm going to share with you an example of that. Next. So, what do you see in the lower picture here? Sneakers, tennis shoes. So, we make a comparison. So, you know what that your shoelaces, they have plastic tips on them, right? So those plastic tips protect the cloth lace. And if those plastic tips get frayed or shortened, then that cloth lace is more vulnerable to unwinding and breaking, right? So the same thing is true with chromosomes. Chromosomes, that's the DNA helix that maybe you learned about in high school biology. Well, that DNA has plastic tips. Those tips are called telomeres, okay? Let's everybody say telomere. Telomere, okay. So we've learned a new word today, okay? So telomere length, you want to have long telomeres, because they have short telomeres, then those are more likely to fray and the DNA unwind, which leads to cellular aging, can lead to metabolic diseases, can lead to cancer, can lead to mental illness. So long telomeres, good. Short telomeres, not so good. So guess what? Telomeres can be inherited. If the mother's telomeres are short, including the telomeres on her eggs, then the baby's telomeres are going to be shorter. And telomeres can also be impacted by the things that we talked about, the social determinants. Living in a unsafe a neighborhood, being homeless, cigarette smoking, all these different things affect and shorten the telomeres. So that's what I mean by these becoming biologically embedded. Does that make sense? Okay. So another way of saying this, how many here have read the book, The Body Keeps Score? There you go. So the body keeps score. So the body is taking this in. Telomere length, cortisol, there's all kinds of other mechanisms for it. When I think of the body keeps score, there's a term. Has anybody here heard the expression, the pain body? I think it's a profound term. It's the pain body, I think, came from Buddhist tradition or whatever. But what it represents is the accumulation of experiences and adversities that someone is carrying inside them that I think affects their DNA, affects their epigenetics. And if you think about the work that you do, and maybe even we look at ourselves and say, how big is their pain body? How big is it? What are they carrying around? When I first started learning about ACEs, I really understood that high ACE scores is seeing this person with carrying this big, big pain body. And how do we kind of help share that burden of carrying it? Next. Okay, have I depressed you yet? I again, you guys are doing the work. You're healers. You're bringing people around. So we really need to talk about resilience. Okay, and so I kind of think of the long shadows as aces, but I think as the sunlight as resilience. Does anybody here want to define resilience for me? Help me out. Remember, I'm the doctor. I just have to hand out medicines. I don't need to do this stuff. Yes. Beautiful. Protective factors that allow them to recover and to adjust to that too. And sometimes that protective factor is a single person, just one person. I was at a conference where they talk about people as medicine. And I like to think that as people as resilience, that one person that believes in you, that values you. Any other thoughts on what resilience is? Your ability, did you play dodgeball when you were in the gym? Were you good? Okay. Yeah, I think that's great, that ability to bounce back. You think of one of those red rubber dodgeballs and you throw it down and it bounces back. But someone who has aces, that dodgeball is kind of deflated. And so we gotta kind of pump it up, get it to bounce again. Okay, great. One more? Any other thoughts on resilience? What it is? Okay, beautiful. Interpersonal and emotional skills to manage stress. Yeah, and to find some kind of peace and adjustment and go forward. Okay, resilience, good.
I gave him the cheat
Oh, okay. Well, they were much better than the cheat sheets. All right, next. Okay, so back to Daniel Sumrock with our the guy who had the real cool beard. So jealous of. But anyhow, he had again an expert, kind of his principles, his points of care, which I thought were really great. That we treat people with respect instead of blaming or shaming them. If I go back to what was going on in the HIV epidemic, the profound negative influence of stigma. If people thought, oh my gosh, if I go for testing, they're going to think I've been promiscuous or I'm using drugs. I'm going to be stigmatized. I'm shamed because I have HIV. So I'm going to hide. And so again, that importance of treating with respect and not the stigma, the blaming and the shaming. The second is listening to intently what they say. How important listening is. Thich Nhat Hanh said, listening is a way of relieving suffering. Sometimes that's the only thing we can do. We can't fix their homelessness. We can't fix their fractured relationship, but we can listen to them. Number 3, integrate adverse childhood experiences. Number 4, integrate the healing traditions of the culture in which they live. And I think that's more important, where sometimes religion and spirituality and history can be part of the healing process. And then C, the easy job that I had, use prescription drugs if necessary. Okay, do you like those principles? Very good. And next. This goes back to our study from Montana. Opportunities to prevent opioid misuse start with assuring safe, stable, nourishing relationships and environments in childhood and across the lifespan to prevent ACEs from occurring and intervening appropriately when they do occur. Are we going to solve the opioid epidemic with just naloxone, et cetera? No, we're going to solve it just like we have to by addressing the ACEs. Okay, just about done. So one of my favorite sayings is better health through better partnerships. So now you have to remember, besides telomere, you have to remember better health, better partnerships. And that kind of, as Kathy said, that's what we were, the whole purpose of the conference is this partnership that we work together. And that better health through better partnerships unfolds on a number of levels. So this is getting a couple to work together, to reconcile, to be together. That's the greatest protective thing against ACEs, is that you have a mother and a father that are supporting each other and are together in raising the children. Road to recovery. And we have some recovery experts here. Better health through better partnerships. Next. So we always ask, do you have a resilience partner? Someone that is that go-to person for you. I think that, in the counseling world, the term a therapeutic alliance, someone that you really can ally and rely on for that resilience. And you have an RC, a resilience community that can come together and help. All right, I'd like to end with a quote that I think of it at least once a day. And it's from a Greek Hebrew philosopher named Philo of Alexandria. And he said this: be kind, no one knows the great battles a person is going through. And we're dealing with situations where we see someone, oh my God, they're using again. Here they are, they're not taking care of their child. Here they are. I can't believe they went back into this dysfunctional relationship. The things that you deal with day in and day out. And you have to go back to think, what about their ACEs? What about their pain body? Be kind. We don't know the great battles that they're going through. Okay. I don't know if I went too long or too short, but I think we have time for some questions.
We do.
Okay.
Don't be shy, group.
But you mentioned integrating ACEs into the care. How do you do that?
That's a great question. How do we integrate ACEs into our care? How do we be ACE aware? Sure. Great. Anybody else? Maybe I'll let you just summarize it a little louder there, Kathy, if we don't have a microphone. Yeah, that's a great point because there is this intersection of how mental health affects physical health. And I'm just going to give you a number of statistics on that. There was a study done, it was published in 2020, and it was looking at women between the ages of 15 and 49 that attended a federally funded health center throughout the country. Like, we have community health center, Anaconda, and so forth. And they asked the question of what percent of the population in the rural areas, and I think Butte would count as that, would you guess 20%, 40%, or 60% of that group self-reported depression? How many say 20%? How about 40%? How about 60%? You guys win. So the actual number was 57.7% self-reported depression, 15.8% anxiety, or excuse me, 28% anxiety, 15.8 had a history of a serious psychiatric illness. So when you took that group, that 50%, 57% depression, and you said, well, what kind of physical illnesses do they have? They had 2 to 3 times the prevalence of hypertension, diabetes, excess body mass index, and cigarette smoking were the things that they looked at. So what happens is ACEs translate into this interface between mental and physical illness. You asked a hard question. Thank you. So I think that resilience community, and I'll have other people contribute, is I think it first starts off in the family. Is the family, if there's one person, whoever there, who's someone that's a trusted therapeutic alliance. So it starts there. I think there are other sources, is I think sometimes a church community can be part of that resilience. For other groups, Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, if alcohol is an issue, other support groups, and then certainly kind of the community that forms through counseling and through the support there. Anybody else have any ideas on that great question? No, thank you. That was very helpful. Okay. Try as yeah. So I no, thank you. And you're absolutely right about trauma-informed care is all about ACEs. And trauma-informed care is team-based. You know, one of the old models, like for me as a physician, is the Lone Ranger model, where I'm going to see a pregnant patient who is dealing with mental illness or substance use. I need a team to help with that. So, you know, at St. James, Jocelyn was a social worker and come in. We had a counselor, et cetera. And that team was able to provide trauma-informed care. And I think that when we ask the question about how do you integrate ACEs, that's part of it. And it begins with that helping a person in their own self-awareness. That's not, the question is not what's wrong with them, it's what happened to them. Helping them understand it's not their fault. And that kind of self-awareness is the beginning. Okay, yes. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. It really is a system problem. And, you know, mental health is kind of on the periphery of funding, and it really needs to be at the center of funding. And we need to change that model. Um, yeah, I wish I had the answer, but I mean, you're right. The data is emerging. You know, it's really clear that unless we have a broader model, and so when you know you go to the doctor, you're not just seeing a doctor that's taking your blood pressure, you're getting evaluated for depression, anxiety, etc. And then absolutely what you say, there's no way you can address substance use and ignore mental illness because they're like this. Thank you. Are we about got? All right. Thanks for your attention.